You are now watching Zach Lesage, the best place to learn about competitive Pokemon TCG. Let's get it! Yo, what's poppin' YouTube? Welcome back to the channel, Zach Lesage here. Today we're going to be going over the top 10 best decks in Brilliant Stars format. We've had a lot of great events this week, such as the GG Tour event by Chill TCG, and the Celio Stats between Celio's Network and Pokestats events. There's been a lot of other events throughout the week, including the largest Brilliant Stars event, the Late Night Series, that are held every single Monday. So it's one of those things where there's so many good events. Where are the decks going? We're going to find out in this video. In the pinned comment, there is access to all of the lists available here, and there's reference videos for many of them. If there's not a reference video there, it's on the way. I'm working hard to get all those videos. Beyond that, we're going to go over why the lists are seeing success, why they're not seeing success, etc., for the top 10 every single Monday at 12 p.m. noon. So, give that video a like, subscribe to the channel, let me know in the comments what your guesses are for the top 10, and we're going to be jumping into our number 10 spot right now. Let's get it. Devouring its way into number 10 and not making it on last week's list is Durant. Now, Durant surprised the world at the Late Night Series as it topped the largest Brilliant Stars event ever. It won the whole thing. Now, Devour is what Durant's all about. Devouring through your opponent's deck, milling them out of their resources, and you win by deck out. So the only non-traditional deck that we have in our metagame right now, I know that there's a few other control decks floating around out there, this is the only one that's seeing success right now. The goal is to go Devour, 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 decking out your opponent's deck. There's a bunch of cool techniques to work around this, but ultimately, I think Durant is a cool deck. Now, a lot of people are struggling with Durant. If you are struggling against Durant, I highly suggest that you might pick up some of the coaching that I offer at metafy.gg/@ZachLesage. That's in the description, because the reason why Durant's not seeing as much success after winning the Late Night Series is most players who have played against a control deck or a mill deck will now just put out a single Pokemon, like a single Mew VMAX or a single Meloetta, and attack. Now, this deck does have some answers, such as Yellhorn and Galar Mine and Curse Shovel, like ways to try to stop you from doing things like that. But ultimately, this is where Durant is the most fragile, is having 1 to 2 attackers out there, not loading up your board with Genesect, not loading up every single Pokemon in play, and not drawing through your deck. Think of it like quicksand. The more that you kind of struggle, the more you're sinking. I've never been in quicksand, but that's what they always tell you, right? So it's one of those things where you're playing against a mill deck, do not continuously struggle and try to draw out of it. I mean, sometimes you have to, but other times you're just going to get devoured until you lose the game. So I think this is a pretty stable list for it. It's working pretty well. I do not think that Durant is the most competitively viable deck right now, but it's probably going to be something similar that we've seen with Decidueye and old school Duraludon decks. When they hit their peak, they then hit a low dip where they're not good for a few weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Durant back up in here. I don't necessarily think we're going to see it in the top 10 for the foreseeable future, and it will probably fade out. It's really getting its strength from that late night finish. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a low top 20 or even dipped out of that. Galloping all the way to number 9 and kind of moving up from number 10. I mean, now that we have some more data, some decks are going to be moving around a little bit. This is our first full-fledged week of Brilliant Stars decks. You got to remember that. Is Ice Rider Calyrex with Arceus VSTAR. Now, personally, I like this build more than a straight-up Ice Rider Calyrex deck, but I think to that, I think I need to test Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX straight up by itself a little bit more. This deck seems to have a lot more options and searchability and stuff like that, but that might make it a little bit less consistent. The goal of this deck is to either attack with Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX or Arceus VSTAR. Now, both have ways to just kind of attack, and Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX can either go with Ride of the High King or Max Lance with Melanie, or you could even go like Melanie and then go for Arceus VSTAR, rip through your opponent with Trinity Nova, and set up multiple Pokemon. I like the setup potential, and I think a lot of players are realizing that Arceus VSTAR is very strong. Pairing it with other strong Pokemon is a good idea. This deck naturally works. This deck to me seems like it might be placed low, but it also might be appropriately placed. It's also difficult because right now there is this deck and the Ice Rider Calyrex build, and it's so early in the metagame to determine which one is better, which list is better, which cards to include, but I do think this is a list that I've been having a lot of success with so far on the ladder. I do recommend for you to give it a try if you are looking for something. However, the other Ice Rider list might be better, and we'll get into that in a little bit. No leaks on where there's placement, but we'll likely see an Ice Rider somewhere within the entire this video or the top 20. Overall, I think this is a cool concept. I just think there's probably better decks, to be honest. Like, I think other Arceus builds have pulled more success, more tournament placements. This doesn't necessarily hit for weakness, so I'd rather look towards something like that. But if you are into an Ice Rider build, honestly, Ice Rider is a lot better than it ever was. It's seeing a lot more success. We'll have to see how it goes. If you're trying to pick up any of these cards, you can go to ptcgostore.com, plug in code ZELASAGE5 to save 5% on your order of PTCGO codes. You can trade for them on PTCGO, or you can rip open some packs on PTCG Live. Additionally, I also have code ZELASAGE8 at atlascollectibles.com. We're now sponsored by Atlas, so totally use that code to save on some physical cards, the Pokemon TCG from Atlas Collectibles. Gussing into number 9 and tied with Arceus Ice Rider, also at number 10 last week, tied with Arceus Ice Rider, is Eternatus VMAX. Etern is such a great deck right now because it gained Choice Belt. Choice Belt really brought that difference between Dread End hitting for 270. Now with Choice Belt, it can hit for 300. You could add Zigzagoon and Scoop Up Nets to get the extra numbers to knock out VSTAR Pokemon, VMAX Pokemon, and of course, we all seen a Mew deck here or there in the metagame, so it's totally worthwhile to include that this deck has a pretty good Mew VMAX matchup, or at least you should because you're a Dark-type deck, right? This build is heavily inspired by Alex Szymanski. They've been seeing a lot of success, along with their testing partner, Josh Frank. So I've really been liking Etern since the beginning. I was testing more of a Leopard deck. I think their deck's a little bit more aggressive, and I think an aggressive Eternatus build seems very straightforward, efficient, and a solid choice. An incredibly good deck to teach a new beginner or anyone to just play expertly for upcoming events. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that Etern's a bad deck because it's easy to play. That's quite honestly a good thing, especially with regionals coming back. You don't need to necessarily worry as much. You're just building up a fat bench with Eternal Zone, and then you're attacking with Dread End. You have Crobat to draw cards, you have Moltres as a backup attacker and to build up energies, and Hoop as a splashable attacker. Zigzagoon, Scoop Up Net, and Choice Belt all work as ways for you to increase your damage output. Overall, I really like this deck. There's just something fun about putting all those extra Pokemon on your bench. Not sure what all the extra bench Pokemon would look like on PTCG Live. Don't necessarily know if I want to see what it looks like yet, but it's one of those things where this is definitely a solid choice, and I heavily recommend for you to try this deck out. I don't know, like it's one of those decks that I have in my bag, because if I was going to Salt Lake City, I might just want to play this deck. You know what I'm saying? Like there's something that I think is legitimately very good about this deck, and I can't just necessarily put my finger on it. But I really like this deck. Fear and panicking all the way into number 6, and dropping from number 5 by one spot is Gengar VMAX. Gengar VMAX seems like it's in a very similar position that it was in the Fusion Strike metagame, where it's not necessarily getting as enough play as I think it should get play. Now, it's no surprise with the top 10 decks or top 5 decks that we saw on the Shuffle Squads channel that Gengar VMAX has some really good matchups up there. Just to name a few, I think that this deck does well against Mew. I think it does well against Arceus Duraludon. I think it has the potential to see success against other Arceus decks. And I do see that it could probably beat an Ice Rider pretty efficiently as well. And you can also see Shadow Rider Arceus. Like, there's a whole bunch of different decks. This is my new take on the deck. And there's a few cards that I'm debating changing as well. The deck Single Strike Roars onto your Gengar or your Stonjourner. The deck now has Stonjourner to do well against single prize card decks. You can attack with Houndoom against single prize card decks. Gengar with Path to the Peak can go through Duraludon. Duraludon as winning the Full Grip Game event and seeing a lot of success at the tournaments. I mean, it even won the Azul Invitational by my Shuffle Squad teammate, Logan McKay. It's one of those things where we need to respect that Duraludon's good. Path to the Peak is low in this format. Gengar plays Path to the Peak really efficiently. Grabbing Lumineon into this deck gives you new opportunities. And then there's that card Gloria that a lot of people just don't necessarily look at, where we now have the opportunity to now search through with Lumineon for Houndour, or maybe Houndour, Stonjourner, and we have searchable ways to get out those kind of Pokemon. You don't necessarily need to drop a Gengar early on, but Gengar does gain a lot because it can use Fear and Panic against a lot of decks that are playing V Pokemon, V-Star Pokemon, V-Union Pokemon, V-Max Pokemon, and you have G-Max Swallow Up that gets the damage modifiers of Single Strike Energy and Choice Belt. Overall, I think this deck's pretty cool. The one card that I'm considering changing right now is a Bird Keeper for an extra copy of Switch, or maybe even an Escape Rope. It's one of those things where, do I like the Lumineon searchability, or am I going to be path locked mid-game and the Bird Keeper is going to be a dead card? That's a big question, but right now I think Gengar VMAX should be on everyone's radar, because Gengar VMAX is one of the most incredibly effective decks that we have in our current formats. Just not enough people are playing it, so if you're looking to make a splash at the Late Night Series events, or any of the upcoming events like Brisbane Regionals, or the Medify Regionals, Liverpool, Salt Lake City, Gengar seems like it's going to be a very strong contender for all of those events. Again, I cannot stress this enough. Usually I get a feeling when it comes to decks, and if I was playing in any of those events, I'd probably be having Gengar in my bag. Just letting y'all know. Combo breaking it out of that number 9, still tied for number 10 last week, is Suicune Ludicolo. Now, this is the typical Suicune Ludicolo deck that we've seen week after week, somewhere making it into the top 20, but nowadays, I think it gains a lot of strength just because you have ways to do more damage. And I think decks that are able to scale their damage typically do well very early in the format at the very least, because Suicune Ludicolo is all about using Blizzard Rondo, having a big bench, focusing on your opponent's bench, and if you need extra damage, you have access to Ludicolo's Enthusiastic Dance to increase by 100 damage, you have access to Quick Shooting, doing an extra 20 damage whenever you like, and you have access to Choice Belt. Multiple damage modifiers, as we just saw in the Eternatus VMAX deck, typically do pretty well. I know a lot of players don't necessarily play Lumineon V in their deck. I think Lumineon V can be very good, just so you can get that Melanie off whenever you're really looking for it, or you can kind of search your deck for some certain cards. Overall, I think that this deck is incredibly effective right now. I think it's probably going to dip as the format gets like a little bit more, how do I get it? Refined, I guess refine's the word that I'm looking for. So as we see decks kind of make it towards the top, Suicune Ludicolo typically kind of fails to the metagame. Now, it might change with Brilliant Stars, and maybe Choice Belt's enough to breathe life into this deck, or maybe Lumineon V is just that busted, but my thought process is that Suicune's probably going to eventually go down, as it always has since Evolving Skies. Will that change? I'm not entirely sure, and if you're a Suicune fan, I'm sure you're probably going to enjoy it, but Suicune decks typically find themselves into the top 20 mix instead of being in the top 10. Right now at number 7, certainly not a bad choice, and I think it's relatively powerful in our early metagame. Swooping into the number 5 spot and jumping from number 6 the previous week is Dark Toolbox. Dark Toolbox saw some of the most success during our Fusion Strike metagame, but during our Brilliant Stars metagame, it kind of peaked up, dipped down, and now it's kind of getting back into that stability. To me, I honestly feel like this is going to be one of the kind of mid decks of the format, where it's just like, it's doing well. I don't think enough players know how to play this deck correctly. I do not think enough players know how to build this deck correctly, but it seems like it's going to see the success of being in the middle, because it's a very difficult deck to play. You want to be sacrificing Pokemon up in the early game, whether that's Sobble after using Keep for Calling, Galarian Weezing, Hoopa, or even just something like a Manaphy, while you build up damage on your opponent's board, or you've sacrificed enough prizes where your Galarian Moltres is good. So you can go Galarian Moltres, drop it down, use its ability, slap on a few energies, attack with Fiery Wrath for a knockout. You can plan those knockouts, it can be quite efficient. You have access to Sableye V after you've done some damage counters, maybe attack with Hoopa's Assault Gate. You can use Crazy Claws to get a knockout. Now, the Zapdos V is going to be helpful against decks such as Gengar, Eternatus VMAX, just any kind of Arceus VSTAR deck, and it can just be plopped down and get a knockout out of nowhere, making it a little bit more efficient than a Crazy Claws, so I think that's really on point. Shout out to my homie Mo Ideas for the idea. I know a lot of players are going to ask me, why do you play the cast form? The cast form is a level ball searchable free retreater, which is better than Tapu Koko. So I think overall this deck has a lot of options. You have a lot of like searchability and a lot of like unique plays. Like you could be Professor's Research, play a Bruno, a Marnie, a Cynthia's Ambition. You now have options to search through with Shady Dealings. So this deck gives you a lot of options, and there's sometimes almost too many options where it gives me a bit of a headache to play. If you are able to play this deck successfully over regionals or any kind of online tournament, by all means go for it. It's incredibly effective in the metagame. Quite often it's just one pivotal mistake that causes players to not see success with this deck. So unless you're ready to play this like Pokemon on hard mode, and sometimes that's not even going to be successful against decks like Mew VMAX, which I see, like, I think they just have a favorable matchup against this beyond what it would look like as a dark type deck. They think this deck does slightly have a below average matchup against Mew. It's one of those things where it's still an effective choice. So by all means, give this deck a try. It's super cool. It's just really difficult to play. Galloping all the way up to number 4 and moving on up from number 7 is pure Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX. So we talked a little bit about the strategy of this deck before. This deck does not play Arceus, which means that you have a lot of more room for consistency or those extra little tech cards that might matter. You might not have the power to search out everything that you want, but it seems like this deck is more concise, and that might end up being a little bit better. I think as we kind of grow with Arceus VSTAR in the format, we'll decide which is better by the end of it. And we see a lot of decks being like, we're adding Arceus because it adds consistency. And to some decks, that really makes it better. I think like Arceus has legitimately made Duraludon a better deck. I think it's legitimately made a lot of decks better decks. In this case, Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX did gain a lot on its own with choice belts, just so you can kind of hit those numbers. You can now knock out V-Star Pokemon. You're now a little bit closer to knocking out VMAX Pokemon. And with cards like Leon and Inteleon and all that stuff, you can knock out some VMAX Pokemon. And Path to the Peak is quite effective in the format. So is this build better or not? That's something that I'm going to be questioning over the next few weeks, and I'm sure we're going to find it out. I think it's going to come a lot down with playability, but I'm assuming that these decks are probably going to morph into one deck, or you might have two divisive paths that are going to see a slight amount of success. So far, this one's proven more successful, so if you are going to play one, this is probably the one to play, but it's up to you to decide if you want to play Arceus V-Star in this deck or not. Leaping into number 3 and coming on up for number 4, we got Arceus V-Star with Toolbox cards. Now, there's a lot of really cool things that you can be doing with this deck, and a lot of it just comes down to searching out the right attackers, pinpointing them against the right matchup. And I mean, if you're playing against a Mew deck, use your Moltres. If you're playing against a Zapdos, or a deck that would be good against Zapdos, I mean, Etern, Arceus V-Star, Gengar, play out Zapdos. You have access to Hoopa that can be good against Single Strike or Rapid Strike. Evil Talk can really stop any deck that's playing Special Energies. Almost all of them play Special Energies, but Cry Attack can definitely just tear down a Mew if they go for Elsa's Sparkle, rip 2 energies, attach another energy for their turn. Zamazenta can be good against both Ice Rider decks that we've already seen in this video. And I mean, searching out energies with Arceus V-Star, or Arceus V, and searching any cards you want. Like, this deck seems to have a lot going on. It might look a little bit inconsistent or messy at first, but I know that my teammate Logan McKay has been tearing it up with this deck. Just recently made top 4 at the late night series with it, so I definitely give it a try. Like, it's one of those things where counterbox decks typically do pretty well. This one seems to be countering the metagame well, and Arceus seems to make it a lot better. We've also seen other players such as Michael Catron play this deck with Shaman V-Star. That might be a cool tech. Like, I think you can just add a bunch of cool techs to this deck, and if it works, it works, and if you pick the right techs, you're probably going to see success. The biggest key thing here is layering the right techs onto the right list. I think we're pretty close to a consistent list here, so I kind of look at the structure with the quick balls, ultra balls, all that good stuff, but everything else seems like you could maybe like kind of Zapdos and maybe add in another tech if it's more relevant or something like that. So this deck's relevancy means I think it's going to be like a top 5 deck, because we now kind of have that Arceus V-Star engine that we needed. But it depends on really what the metagame grows into to see how those techs are going to fly. So overall, really liking this deck. A little bit difficult to play, but it is super cool if you hit the right matchups. Skyscrapering against most of the other competition, and jumping also from number 2 last week, so it's been pretty stable since it popped up at the Full Grip Games event. Riley Holbert was able to win the event with Duraludon VMAX. I think that it's one of those things where we've seen a few players see success, including Logan McKay, like I brought up earlier before, winning the Zool Invitational. A lot of high finishes from this deck overall. Now, a lot of people are going to stop here and be like, yo, why do you play 4-2 Arceus and 2-3 Duraludon? That's kind of weird. You want to be starting with Arceus V, and you do not want to be starting with Duraludon V. You only play 2 Duraludon V because this deck actually plays a copy of Mustard. Mustard, after using Arceus V-Star's Starbirth ability to search things out, you could go Ultra Ball, pitch your hand away, summon a Duraludon, and that kind of works as the 3rd Duraludon V. And you only need to get 1 out of your 2 Duraludon Vs out to evolve into another Duraludon VMAX, and you're really going to go offer up an Arceus V-Star worth 2 prize cards, and Duraludon VMAX, and a summon Duraludon VMAX. In case you can't summon, you still have a second Duraludon V, just in case you need to put things down. You either power up with Trinity Charge or Trinity Nova, depending on if you're Arceus V or Arceus V-Star. This deck kind of cuts through the competition like butter. I can't necessarily, like, I recently saw a tweet from Jake Gearhart saying that Duraludon VMAX isn't the best attacker because it's not necessarily, it's hard to power up, and Its Skyscraper ability doesn't necessarily stop everything, including Mew, because there's even like Max Miracle that can go through it. But I think this deck's just like kind of sturdy with the Big Charm, has access to Crystal Cave, there's no weakness. This build plays Hyper Potion, which you can use with Double Turbo Energy, just to rip off a Double Turbo Energy. I think there's a lot of really cool things going on here, and as this deck evolves, there's just something magical about this deck. I can't describe it, but I think it's the mustard. Something about the mustard gives me vibes of like, if we look at past concept, we've seen how like Arceus has been able to win regionals and even win a world championships in 2015. Like cards like that have been very skill based, seen success in the past. So to me, I think that Duraludon VMAX might just be our second place deck in this format. Now, you can see how it had that huge leap from the 330 CP at the Arceus Toolbox deck to the 790 CP. A lot of people are like, yo, how do you calculate the CP? Well, I hand calculate all of the events in a week, or as many as I possibly can. I mean, at some point on Sunday, I'm doing all these videos, and it takes me a few hours to sit down and calculate everything. I have my own way of ranking things between events, between 4 all the way to 500 plus player events, to give some kind of kicker amount of CP. Anyways, this deck has performed phenomenally this past week, and that's all that really matters. And I do think it's going to continue to see success in this upcoming week. Watch out for Skyscraper. It's definitely going to get you. Skyscraper is a really good ability to stopping your opponent's special energies from hitting. But the big question that we're going to run into is, what's our number one deck? I'm sure everyone who's regularly watches these videos probably has a hunch. But if you don't, let me know in the comments below. We'll have to see what it is. Let's jump into our number one spot. Boom, here you have it, Mew VMAX, number one for the literally the past forever. This deck has more than double of what Arceus Duraludon had at 790, and like almost 6 times as much as Arceus Toolbox in number 3. So you can see that Mew VMAX has been crushing it. To go from 790 to 1840 is almost disgusting. The fact that this deck literally has the same amount of CP as decks 2 through 10 approximately is gross. And I mean this in a good way. Mew VMAX is disgustingly good. You have access to copying Psychic Leap with Cross Fusion Strike. You have access to copying Techno Blast to have that stable attack. You max Miracle through things even like Duraludon. You have things that decks just don't have. And Melodious Echo is explosive. You can use it on the first turn. Alice's Sparkle, rip 2 energies, attach another energy, boom, knockout. Now this deck is just like turbo consistent. There's nothing special about my list. It's just double turbo energies, so you can go Cross Fusion Strike a little bit faster. That's going to help you if one of your Pokemon gets knocked out right away. You have access to single prize card attackers in case you run into something like a Malamar or a Dark Toolbox deck. You have ways to get around things like Path to the Peak because this deck plays 4 stadiums. I mean, you have access to Choice Belt, 4 power tablets to knock out whatever is in your path. Mew VMAX is the most aggressive deck that we've seen in our format in a long time. I just think it's one of those things where if you do not have Mew VMAX in your bag, it's one of those things where you should just probably have it. It's so successful, so if you're trying to see success at these events, from a competitive standpoint, Mew VMAX should definitely be on everyone's list. Like, if you could bring 5 decks to a regionals, and you're trying to win the regionals, Mew VMAX is definitely one of the decks you want to have in your bag. And it's one of those cards where I literally have not bought physical cards in a while, just because I didn't know when events were going to come back or anything else like that. I bought a full Mew VMAX deck just in case I want to play it at an event. It's literally worthwhile to play at any given event, and it's never a wrong choice. Like, even at Field of Dark, Mew VMAX comes out on top, and this past weekend absolutely dominated. Like, Mew VMAX is just so good. I could go on forever. I know some of y'all are going to hate that, but I'm just giving you my honest competitive values when it comes down to it. Mew VMAX absolutely has been crushing the competition, and I'm sure we're going to see that number one next week and for the foreseeable future. If you want to beat this deck, play Path to the Peak Dark decks. Gengar VMAX does a really good job at beating this deck. It's literally one of the only decks on this list that I think can consistently beat Mew to some degree, and even then it's not a 100-0 matchup. So keep that in mind. Mew VMAX absolutely busted. We'll see where it's at next week. And that's where we're at with this video today, peeps. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing it. I know a lot of y'all are going to be upset about Mew VMAX being at the top, and some of y'all might be happy, but it's been crushing out the Brilliant Stars format. Is this deck too much? I mean, it's one of those things where a few players have brought up, should it be banned? I'm honestly not sure, and I know that's a whole side discussion. We'll have to see how Salt Lake City Regionals turns out and how Brisbane Regionals turns out, and the Tri-Metify Regionals coming up that I'm going to be running this weekend. So, I mean, check it out. If you're trying to win, Mew VMAX is probably really good. And just throwing that out there, if you are trying to prepare for any of these events, you can always hit me up at metafy.gg/@ZachLasage. That link's in the description. It's one of those things where I can't help you on your journey if you're looking for anything. I've been super booked lately, but I do have a little bit more availability in my schedule to accommodate everyone for these events. I just want to make sure that everyone's feeling good about themselves, whether you're a new player to the game and you're just trying to make sure that you're ready for regionals, or you're coming back into the game and you want to shake some of the rust off. I could definitely help you out there. If you're trying to pick up any of the cards for this deck, go to ptcgeostore.com, plug in code ZLasage5. Does help out this content by all means. I do get a little bit of a splashback there, and you can save on your codes, whether you're just ripping them open on live or if you're just going to try to trade them on PTCGO. You can also go to atlascollectibles.com, plug in code ZLasage8. It's one of those new codes that I'm going to throw out there for you, so you can save 8% off Pokemon singles and all that kind of good stuff. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. That's what we got going on today. My voice is a little sore. I just got back from a 1,000-mile round trip to see some family, and trying to get this video out to everyone. It's like currently 1:30 in the morning, and I still have more to record. So I will catch up with everyone later. Sharing this video with your friends would be absolutely meaning the world to me. We just passed 10K subs. Let's try to get to 11K. Like, it's just continuously moving this train. Let's get it going. Have a great week, everybody, and I'll keep you updated with all the best Pokemon content ever. I just feel like I'm blabbling now and going on, so I'll catch up with all you later. Peace out and have a great day. I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. It means the world to me. And my goal with this channel is to spread my love of the game and knowledge with our entire Pokemon TCG community. If you haven't already, help signal boost this video to other Pokemon TCG fans by liking it, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to the channel. Hopefully we reach our goals really soon. Check out this recommended video and have yourself a great day. Thanks.